Hey folks, it's Chili here. Today we're going to be trying something new. I've run out of B-reel to use for the background of my monologues, and even I'm starting to feel like seeing the trailers over and over again is getting kind of repetitive. So instead, I recorded myself playing a ranked game, and that'll serve as the backdrop for today's video. I'll still be overlaying a lot of important information on top of the gameplay, so I recommend not getting super invested in watching the match itself. Also, fair warning, I consider myself an experienced player, but I'm by no means a pro, so don't look at my gameplay as a learning guide. If anything, feel free to give me some tips if you see anything I can improve on. And between you and me, I'm also terrible with the bosses. I just picked them since they're a good thematic fit for what we're going to be talking about today. Anyways, let's get to the topic at hand, shall we? A few days ago, the devs published a preview for the upcoming Ayyubid civilization variant, which is coming soon in the Sultans Ascend DLC for AOE4. I find it really interesting how different the reaction was from the community this time. Unlike the Jeanne d'Arc preview, which is still mired in quite a bit of controversy, the Ayyubids were met with a far more encouraging reception by the community. The sentiment seems to be that this is the standard that the fans expect from a civ variant. New units, new mechanics, great historical theming, and a couple of exciting "this changes everything" kind of features, while still staying true to the Empire in Age of Empires. And while I'm very hyped for this release, to be honest, I'm also not the biggest fan of what was announced. Now you might be thinking, Chili, why would you complain about the Ayyubids when the Jeanne d'Arc faction is way crazier? Well, from my point of view, the Jeanne d'Arc faction represents a reach concept, something that's really out there, mixes things up significantly, doesn't follow the rules, which allows it to push the boundaries of the game's civilization design. The Ayyubids, on the other hand, are much more in line with the traditional civ design. No hero with an ult to speak of. I was a little bit surprised that we didn't get Salahuddin as a hero. I was really expecting this to be the second hero civ in this expansion. But the Ayyubids aren't just a traditional civ, they're more like a traditional civ on cocaine. 2 camels in the whole game? How about 4? 4 House of Wisdom wings? Here's 8. No one builds a siege tower? Here's the biggest siege tower you've ever seen. Trader? Camel trader. The Ayyubid kit just seems incredibly overloaded. It kind of reminds me of the more recent champion design that we see in League of Legends, where there's like 5 passives on every single ability, and that has me worried about the future design philosophy for Age of Empires 4. But before we get more into that, let's do a quick overview of what was shown. Every faction has at least one unique unit available to them in the feudal age. For the Ayyubids, it seems like that's going to be the Desert Raider. Here we can clearly see bronze armor, which is a signifier of a feudal age unit. The main cool thing about the Desert Raider is that they can swap between sword and bow stances. I'm guessing that the melee stance might make it stronger against cavalry units, so it'll fulfill a similar role to the bossed Camel Rider, while the range stance gives it an answer to spears, which would have otherwise been a natural counter. Stance swapping units have been highly requested for a while now, but these kinds of units are notoriously difficult to balance, which is possibly why the Ottoman Spahi had their bow stance removed. I'm also guessing that these guys will be weak to archers, just like other cavalry archer units in the game, otherwise they'd be completely broken. We were also getting Camel Lancers, which seem to have a really strong emphasis on their charging ability. Now I gotta say, I think the naming scheme here is pretty weak. It would have been really cool to say, name Camel Lancers Mamluks or something, just to add some name variety. I mean, we already had Mamluk camel units in AOE2, it's not that out there of a concept. They easily could have named these guys like Mamluk Raiders and Mamluk Lancers. Historically, the Ayyubids were an Egyptian-centered dynasty and were already under heavy influence from Mamluks even before they were ultimately overthrown and transformed into the Mamluk Sultanate. Next up, we have the Dervishes, which seem to replace the Imam as the religious unit for the Ayyubids. Now, we've had Dervishes before in Age of Empires. Back in AOE3, the Sudanese Dervishes were a native unit that came with the African Royals expansion. These guys are a reference to the Mahadist movement that gave British Egypt quite a bit of trouble back in the late 19th century. But Dervish is also kind of a broad term in the West, referring to many different varieties of Sufi Muslims. The Ayyubid Dervishes seem to be more medically inclined. I didn't know this before, but the stretchers on the sides of the camel are actually a real thing. Here's an example from World War I. It seems like the devs probably drew inspiration from this photo. Lastly, it seems like we might also be getting some camel traders, which, if they keep their debuff to cavalry, could be quite powerful in countering raids. We actually already had assets for a Malian camel trader in the game, but those guys got cut. But from the looks of it, these guys are using the same exact camel asset, so I wonder if they'll actually stick around this time. So in one fell swoop, we're going from 2 camel units in the whole game to now 6. Relic, we gotta talk. I mean, yeah, camels were a thing in medieval Egypt for sure, but at a certain point, isn't this getting a little too stereotypical? I guess we also have that horse archer unit. I'm a little bit surprised that we're not seeing it in this preview, but considering the fact that the Camel Raider has a ranged stance, that suggests to me that the horse archer is going to be a campaign-only unit. It'd be pretty redundant to give the faction 2 cavalry archer units. We'll also be getting 2 unique siege units, the Tower of the Sultan, which seems like some kind of super-powered ram, and the Manjanique, which is a mangonel that can launch fire projectiles. How much you want to bet Kingdom of Heaven inspired like 90% of this design? On a side note, I couldn't find any historical reference to the Tower of the Sultan. Salahuddin and the Ayyubids certainly made use of siege towers, but there doesn't seem to be anything of particular note here. The nostalgic side of me was certainly reminded of the siege towers back in Age of Mythology, But when it comes to massive siege towers in history, the only ones that come to mind for me are the twin siege towers that Alexander had built while besieging Tyre. Fun story, the defenders literally blew them up with a demo ship. And the other one that comes to mind is the Heliopolis built during the siege of Rhodes, not to be confused with Heliopolis, which is a city in ancient Egypt. I just learned that while doing the research for this video. I can't believe I've been saying it wrong my whole life. Fun fact, once the siege was lifted, the Heliopolis was melted down and the materials were used to construct the Colossus of Rhodes. Hey, it's the world's first wonder victory. But yeah, anyways, the Ayyubid Tower of the Sultan may just be a fantasy unit with some loose historical inspiration. Feel free to educate me in the comments if you happen to know more about this. I am glad to see that it'll be shooting projectiles though. Historically, siege towers were much more about providing archers and ballista a higher vantage point rather than just for protecting the melee guys trying to scale the walls. In fact, that'd be a great way to make the current siege towers more relevant in game. Allow the units garrisoned inside to have much greater line of sight and shoot arrows. The last unit that they mentioned was the Ayyubid Advisor, which seems to improve production structures in some way, but we don't have too much info on how they work just yet. The other piece that was revealed was the Ayyubid House of Wisdom. Unlike the Abbasid House of Wisdom, the Ayyubids will have 2 sub-options within each wing, making for a total of 8 potential age-up options. The benefits from the different options will scale as you age up, which is very reminiscent of AOE3. Specifically, the Native American factions in that game had tribal council leaders that had scaling benefits if you age up with them later in the game. I'm a bit disappointed that the Ayyubids also use the House of Wisdom as their landmark system. I was really hoping to see some new Middle Eastern landmarks get some much needed representation. I mean, the Ayyubids were centered in Egypt anyways and have little association with the House of Wisdom all the way over in Baghdad. The historical issues are not really a problem though. What is a problem is how overloaded this kit is. Keep in mind, I'm not talking about balance, we don't know the numbers yet. I'm purely just talking about how much stuff they crammed into the civilization design. I'm really not a fan of this approach. In my previous video, the top 5 reasons AOE4 was able to win me over, I went over the biggest selling point of AOE4 for me, which was emergent gameplay. The way a set of simple, well-crafted rules can allow for the possibility of hugely complex scenarios. Emergent gameplay is good because it gives players the room to be creative and express their skill on their own terms, rather than needing to strictly follow the game's rules. But when you add more complexity, you're essentially adding more rules that will constrain the player. On top of that, it also makes the game much more of a burden to learn. Memorizing 150 Pokemon in Gen 1 was pretty easy, but did you know that we now have 1,015 Pokemon? How many people do you think can remember all of them at this point? At a certain point, they all kind of just blur together. In this preview, the Ayyubids are shown to have, what, 4, 6, 7, almost 8 unique units? Keep in mind the Chinese and the Malayans are currently tied at the record at just 6 unique units, and I haven't even mentioned the fact that the Ayyubids can also get access to mercenaries. One of the things I really like about AOE4 is that though there aren't that many unique units, the ones that are in the game get to be much more distinct and impactful. I really want us to avoid a situation like in AOE3 where there's hundreds of unique units, but they all end up feeling really samey with just some minor stat tweaks among them. Getting the right balance between complexity and simplicity is like trapezing on a razor-thin line. So in my opinion, adding more unique units should be done with extreme discipline, and only when it's crucial to reinforcing the civilization's identity. Otherwise, how do you justify the low number of unique units for the current civs? What's more is that the Ayyubids are not some culturally distinct civilization, they're just a variant of the Abbasids, and historically they had a lot of cultural overlap. I think large rosters of unique units should instead be saved for civilizations that come from distant cultures that have completely different styles of warfare. For instance, the Malayans have a lot of unique units because unlike traditional civs, they have no access to lancers or crossbowmen, which is at least partially historically inspired. Without this standard, I'm afraid we're going to start seeing a lot of design creep and design bloat. We'll get unique units that will overlap way too much, just like in AOE3, and everything's going to start to feel really samey. We'll also get mechanics that get rehashed over and over again, which will prevent the game from feeling fresh. With the current civ variant approach, Relic seems to only want to highlight a subsection of an existing civilization, like a hero, a dynasty, an order, or a philosophy, rather than a neighboring culture that shares some similarities, like the Jurchens for China or the Burgundians for France. If they want to take this approach, I think that's fine, but I think the developers should take it as an opportunity to be a little bit more out there, explore and push boundaries on what a civ can be in the game, kind of like the Jeanne d'Arc faction, although maybe not exactly like that one. Otherwise, if they take too much of a traditional approach towards civilization design, it runs the risk of crowding out the representation of future cultures. For example, I made a concept on the Amazigh a while back. They were also known as Berbers or Moors, or you could think of them as the Moroccans. While neighbors with the Abbasids and at one point under their empire, the Amazigh are a culturally distinct group with a unique fighting style, amazing architecture, and significant historical impact on both Europe and Africa. But with the Amazigh design, I kept things really simple, following the existing structure set within the game. The Amazigh get access to only 2 unique units, the Zanata and the Camel Caravan, armor. I picked those two because I felt like they were core to this civilization's identity. The release of the Ayyubids with all of their unique perks and mechanics, in my opinion, cuts off the potential of a Moroccan civilization, or other civs for that matter. Why do the Ayyubids have 3 different unit abilities? Stand swapping camel raiders, fire shot manjaniques, and mass healing dervishes. Almost every other civ only has 1 unit ability, like the Delhi Sultanate has infantry that can sprint, or the French arbaleteurs can set up their pavie shields. I'm just seriously hoping we don't go more and more in the direction of League with this increasing trend of complexity creep. Anyways, that's all I have to say on this. What do you guys think? How are y'all feeling about the Ayyubids? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoy my content, please leave a like, and if you want to see more, please hit that subscribe. And also let me know what other kinds of videos you guys are interested in seeing. How did you guys feel about this format with the gameplay in the background? Anyway, signing off for now. Stay frosty, stay chilly.